So we're doing our first time when we're digging in, trying to edit some memos. And one of the things we need to acknowledge is this sucks. And I mean that in the most honest way. I hate editing my own work. I hate other people editing my work because I personalize it. When I write something, it feels more personal than that when I'm bubbling the Scantron. It's like, oh, I just bubbled in wrong. But when I write something, it's a reflection of my personality. It's a reflection of this. And so we tend to personalize a whole bunch of information. And then when we get feedback, we take it personally. And it's been one of the hardest things for me to develop as a professional is the attitude of my work exists outside of me. So when we go through your essays today, and some of you have already submitted things to me, it's painful. The analogy I think works best. It's like surgery. From a certain perspective, I told you I cut you open and I ripped your heart out. That's what some people feel. And if that's your perspective when you get feedback, you're like, well, I really just wanted you to look at this and say, I'm amazing. You get perfect. I'm not the person for you. Because what I view this is like a heart surgeon, cutting you open, ripping your heart out. But the objective isn't to kill you, it's to figure out how to strengthen your heart, to figure out what we need to do better. So I know this as we look through some of these, I don't hold back. I don't try and when you're editing, I don't go, well, this sentence is great. It's like, we usually look for where we can improve rather than the 95 things you're going to do right. We're going to focus on the 20 things you did wrong. And since I wanted to keep that in balance, the nice thing about this first writing exercise is there really isn't a lot of dispute over what the right answer is, because I gave it to you. So I'm going to activate multiple participants can share screen. Actually, I'm going to do something slightly different. Mitchell, can you email me your, actually everyone, if you haven't already emailed me, can you just email me your thing so I can quickly edit and show you what that looks like. If you already emailed me, you don't need to send it again. And I know I jumped right in. Hope everyone's had a great day. Thank you for waking up early. All those normal greetings. I just, when I edit a memo, it sometimes takes 20 minutes and I don't want to waste 10 minutes doing greetings and then tell someone I didn't get to your memo.
Cool. I sent mine over, so it should be there in a sec.
Yeah. And if you didn't hear, the Tuesday, so a week from yesterday, is the downtown parade for the. So I wish there was some way I could make that like extra credit or something, because I think that'll be something that in 10. This is your senior year. You've lost so much, but to get to participate in a national championship celebration, I'm expecting there'll be 10,000 people downtown. That'll be a. I don't know how they'll socially distance. I don't even know if that'll happen. But I'm not required to enforce those rules. Okay, still waiting on Mitchell. There it is. And everyone can see the screen right now. I'm going to do one thing slightly different than I was intended. I just want to have it on the screen so you can see my face, so I'm not looking away when I edit. So I have not read this before. So you're going to see the live ugly process I go through when I read things. So the first thing I'm going to do is review. I'm going to turn track changes on. That way there's no confusion when Paul gets feedback or Mitchell gets feedback on whether this is his writing or my writing. Because the last thing you want to do is have the person who's editing it for you actually introduce a typo. And then you don't think to look back. So I'm just, first thing I'm doing is I'm scanning. So a word on a memo, we can cut this. So we wouldn't need to put our name at the bottom of a memo because at the very top, you've already identified who it's from. There's a redundancy there. Now in the email I send, I might have a line or two above that says see email below, but even that you could probably, that's just surrealism for weirdness sake. Most likely you would have this as an attachment, and we're not getting that particular in this class. One of the phrases I don't like is dilemma. So I'm just going through first. That's not, it elevates the situation. It feels like we're trying to be a little creative writing, because it'd be like calling it a crisis. Or now if we were doing an oral presentation, I would probably call this a dilemma. The dilemma we face, because in oral presentations, we want to use a little more engaging language. This memo could eventually be used as a court filing. And the last thing I would want to have to do is defend why I thought it was a dilemma. It is a dilemma in that you have a choice. And so I might call it issue, I might call it problem definition. But dilemma just brought, in my opinion, it elevated it. Now, I would also not call it a result. A conclusion or recommendations, I would be comfortable with. A result, like, suggests to me more of a cause and effect. So it's not wrong, but it feels very elevated. So I'm looking now at the background. So I feel like I could say everything faster. Everything feels wordy to me. And so I'm gonna rewrite a couple of these to just show you ways to do it faster. Agreement. I don't know that I lost any meaning. To say shares of preferred stock versus just saying preferred stock, I think most readers will be able to follow that. Now, what I'm not saying is you're wrong, but what I view is think about where your internship. Your supervisor billed out probably at $350 an hour, if not 500 or more. And then the partner would have to read it, and they bill out to $2,000 or $3,000 an hour, depending on the client. If we can take and condense things to one page or make it shorter, it's faster to read. And so people want things to just go, and now in this case, the second sentence, exchange 250,000 shares of preferred stock. You do need to have shares of preferred stock in that case, because the English doesn't work if you just say 250,000 preferred stock. Well, that's not a sentence. 250,000. Maybe we could do this. So the next thing I'm doing is a quick scan. I'm looking, does every sentence have a period? Either they're all sentences or none of them are sentences, but you don't want to have a combination. Okay, if Rose liquidated for whatever reason, is liquidated. No, I like yours better. And so you saw I tried to type something. I typed it out and then I was like, I'm wrong. Because to me, this isn't a linear process. I'm going to try things and it's not going to work. And um, now, see the phrase of the preferred shares. Is there any ambiguity on what we're talking about if we just said, if we took it out? The original issue price plus any unpaid declared dividends. So I think we can take out of the preferred stock because there's only one object we're talking about in this paragraph. So yes, you're right. To be more clear, we could put it, but I don't think there's any ambiguity. Or the amount. And I think this is a direct line from the case. And I found it confusingly written then. So it's hard for me when I don't fully comprehend, because these cases are not perfect from an English perspective. They're oftentimes cumbersome in how they're written, because, and you probably noticed this in the CPA multiple choice questions, sometimes you're writing things to defend against a weird scenario that someone could imagine. Um, so why did you think, Mitchell, the conversion rights were an important enough issue to highlight separately?
Well, that's a good question. I know they just had their own slide, and I thought it made sense because it talked about liquidation so much, and so the conversion rights were key in that process.
Okay, so now I want to force a dilemma on you. Is this still background on the preferred stock agreement, like just more information about the stock agreement, or is it actually a separate topic?
I think it's I think it would still be in background because it kind of has to do with like if it's liquidated, then the conversion rights come into play.
Yeah, and that's what I was asking is because it's not a separate agreement. Because now we'll just even look at the flow of this. You have the background on the preferred stock, background on the warrant. In the middle, it felt like there was this weird side. I couldn't tell if it was a sidebar, if it was irrelevant. And now we've kind of consolidated for the reader, if they only want to know about the background on the preferred stock, everything that's related to it is contained in one location.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That makes sense.
the word will can almost always be deleted. It's a weird word. In the event of Rose being liquidated, conversion rights terminate at the close of business on the law. Okay, so I want this is really true. At the close of business on the last day preceding the date of fixed payment of such amounts in the event of the preferred uh, at the close of business on the last day preceding the date fixed for payment of any such amounts. Like if we took that out, like that's going into the details. Is that background or details? And that's real. I want to push you on that. That a memo is not going to provide all the details. It's going to provide all the. I'm going to use a term we use in the accounting literature sometimes: the salient details. What are the details that truly bring clarity to this discussion? That might be relevant. when the date is. I would probably, if it's me, when I'm doing my first round, I would probably include it in the background, but I would take and make it red, knowing that I'm going to come back to that issue. If I don't reference the fact that the date of the termination rights in my memo at all, then I know this is trivia. This is important information that the client would need for other circumstances, but in determining how to classify it today, it's not relevant. Because there's going to be a whole slew of details that we're not going to talk about. Did we lose anything?
No, that was just, yeah, unnecessary detail, or just could have been shortened.
Yeah, and that's there's definitely a school of thought that says, who cares? All we're trying to do is get our answer out there, and we don't need to not be particular about this. But the better you are at communicating your ideas in writing, the better you are. Your supervisors will like working with you, and your supervisors like working with you. They rate you higher. When they rate you higher, you get better audit engagements, you get better things. And so when you write these really long memos that are cumbersome, it just impairs you. Now, I didn't say you were wrong. In no way am I suggesting anything Paul did was wrong. I actually, the only thing I would argue was separating conversion rights was confusing and problematic. That might have tripped up a reviewer who might have skipped over that when they were looking at preferred shares, not catching up. Now, this is where I have a problem. I think you've got 3 topics. Because right here, you talk about preferred stocks and warrants. But then warrants aren't mentioned again to here. So in this case, I wouldn't mess around with it. I think, but I would add a word. Agreed to exchange preferred stock. I actually introduced an error, sorry about that. To invest company. Agreed to exchange. I'm going to add a word, a bundle of preferred, because later on I'm going to talk about this as a bundle transaction. And so I'm seeding in the facts, preparing my reader for an argument I'm going to make later on. And it also explains why I mentioned both preferred stocks and warrants in this discussion. Why don't I just mention one? See what I did there? But we forgot a period at the end of this sentence. And then I'll tell you, 95% of accountants would be driven crazy if you didn't put that 0 in front of the decimal place. That to just say 0.01, I'm not going to ding you a point when I grade things like this, like that to me, because you're not wrong. 0.01 and 0.01 are the same, but it highlights how it really visually makes it clear that this is a penny. Occurrence is again just, and I know you probably were drawing heavily from the memo, the background on the case. So you're not wrong. It's not would. It can. Now I look at this point, and again, I know I'm being picky, and this is why it takes me. People are like, why it takes me an hour to give you feedback on things, because this is how I do things. I go through each sentence. I want to know if I can move this line up to here. The right to person at an exercise. No, I don't like that. A preferred stock. I'm going to let it go. I don't care. Okay, now this is a problem. We switch subjects on the second, between the second and third. It ceased to be about the warrants, and now it became about the company that owns the warrants. And the reason why this is relevant is we're going to argue later on that they're freestanding financial instruments. If they're freestanding financial instruments, they can be sold. So it's the rights stick with the warrants, not the company. So it's.
Could I say something like, yeah, these warrants are exercisable with a cash payment by the customer?
No, you don't even need to say by the customer. These warrants are exercised with a cash payment. Because who else would exercise it? And we don't say customer because they're not a customer; they're an investor. And I don't know by the. It would technically be by the phrase "the holder of the warrant," which is a really cumbersome phrase. And then the warrants. Have no shareholder right until exercised. Now, why in the actual originating case did they talk about invest company and they would not get this? Because the perspective changed. The objective of the case was talking about where invest company was at that moment in time. We're not giving background on invest company. We're giving background on the warrants because we're not being asked to classify how invest would invest in anything about invest. We're being asked how we would classify the warrants that trivially, it's just trivia that they are held by invest company. They could be held by any other. If I change the name of the company, our answer would not change. So the warrant is the object of our consideration. Actually, I really like what you did here. I haven't seen anyone done this, and I really think this is a very clever way to approach this. I don't like necessarily the words you did, and so I don't want you to get too big an ego at this moment. But you did something I really liked. You brought right up that what is the relevant standard? Because what I'd like to see is a sentence that goes, typically a private company would only consider ASC 480-10 dash, and I don't remember the paragraph. However, since now don't do first person. You're not we. We, it's since the company, or you could say Rose, is contemplating registering with the SEC, the more relevant standard is for yeah, I like how that's kind of did that. But the problem is that it's almost like I really like that was brought out in kind of a really way to highlight that issue. No one else has been able to, in the drafts I've seen, has been able to frame that so directly and cleanly. Um, Even when I was sketching it out, I hadn't thought of just putting that out there as a separate section. But I would still have it right here, um, where I would kind of just go, um, what is the proper classification? Um, there's a little bit of a lag when I type. Sorry about this. That spelled horrible. Oh, it fixed it for me. So I just wrote one quick sentence there in the middle. Now, some people, I've seen a lot of people make this two sentences. Issue one, how to classify the preferred stock. Issue two, how do you classify the warrants? I combined it into one sentence. I don't know that which is better. I'm not going to beat you up if you want to say that these are two. By putting them as two different issues, you're highlighting the fact that they do not have to have the same treatment. That these are two separate decisions. By combining it into one, it does minimize the fact that there are two unique issues. I don't mind a section where you talk about the relevant standards. I think that, but I think you might be a little fast at this stage with this. Like this, just in terms of, I would like to see this broken out, and I'm gonna switch to someone else so we can see. I think you'll see when you look at someone else's memo, a different way to do the analysis. But there's nothing wrong with this. It's all words and doesn't really highlight what was the standard, what was the paragraph. And so I'm going to save this. I'm going to send it back to you. I'm going to try and send it back to you. Now you see all my email because that's really relevant. Now, when you get something like that back, do you have to do what I say? No, you could look at some of the changes I made and went, I'm just not comfortable with that. I really want it to look like something else. And that's fine. That's not going to bother me. But I do want to give you flexibility to just see different opinions. And so the main goal when we do these edits isn't to drive you to a particular outcome. It's to kind of offer ideas on how to communicate your ideas. So first thing I'm going to do is turn track changes on again. Cameron?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I don't think I need supervisor name because that's kind of implied by that. Not, again, I'm taking a look, I'm just scanning to begin with. Okay. I don't know that anyone that would ever read that. Like that, my eyes are immediately drawn to the recommendations. I don't need like a warm up. And I know from an English perspective, I just like created like 7 cardinal sins, just saying, just throw out your answer. I love this, the wording challenge. And I don't have the perfect answer right now because I struggle with and I've read about 10 of these so far, and I've given, I think, half the time I gave one feedback, half the time I gave the other feedback. Is not required or should not be classified. And so, because I flip back and forth, it's like, it doesn't qualify as a liability. But if you want to classify it as a liability, because the standard actually say you can't call it a liability. And I don't know. I've read it a couple times, and it's not the clearest part of the standards. But here, so you switch. The warrants must be classified as a liability. So is it an option or a requirement? So I like that. What I don't like is this is a different font size. The recommendations are a bigger font. It feels like, and I'm not trying, it feels like the kind of thing we do in high school when we're trying to but in a professional setting, this is going to be almost likely always converted into different formats and traded around. I might add one blank line there. Not that it's wrong, but white space just allows things to fit a little more comfortably. And I'm screwing this up, so. You know, I want it. Were you wrong? No, but speed. And so now this is where I would come through and I would use the facts. I think bundle is going to be relevant, so I might italicize it. I'm not going to bold it because that's too much. Got to put a period there. Same type of feedback on, we could probably condense this a little. Now, there are some schools of thought that would say do this. I didn't even know you could bullet point um, a footnote. Like, so that's a weird little word. Now, what I did was this is kind of I want to talk about. I want to make sure that that's there in case the person needs to know. But the reality is, I'm not going to be discussing deemed liquidation events at that much. But I feel I can't just cut it. So I just footnote it as in case you're unfamiliar with this definition. I do want to make sure I reference it. Now, I don't know if I caused that, but you want to make sure all your bullet points line up. Who would choose it if not the holder? Actually, no. You do reference, that is one of the arguments later on, is the holder has the right, not the issuer. So that phrase, which I was so quick to cut, is actually potentially very relevant. Maybe convert it. I took a picture of that for some unknown reason. I'm showing you an alternative way. You're not wrong. And I keep saying this because I don't want you to feel like that there's a particular format or wording. It's the same thing. It's just shorter words. So if when you see me doing some of these things, if you're asking me, would I have made these choices leaving my at the start of grad school? Absolutely not. That this is, the more you read, the more you write, you learn different phrases, you see different ways people do it. So it's just an exposure thing. And so I'm just trying to expose you guys to different ways to write it. Okay. I had to read the case again, but I'm confused by this sentence. Preferred stocks are mandatorily convertible, meaning they're forced to be converted only if agreed by the majority of shareholders. Does the case say that? Because I'm a little unclear of majority of Rose's shareholders, or the Invest share. Like is the majority of preferred shareholders or Rose?
I think I would have to look back. There's a chance I misinterpreted that.
And I mean, I don't remember off the top of my head. And so, but because there's two different shareholders, we have common shareholders of Rose, and we also have the preferred shareholders who, because I can't imagine that the right actually falls to the some minor 51% of the preferred shareholders can force the rest to convert. And that doesn't seem to make any sense to me. But
yeah.
Same comment as before. You Invest here isn't wrong. I don't know that the warrants. So why did I take out that issuance on or after issuance? From a legal perspective, that's a relevant detail. But how could you exercise an option before it's issued? So it's implied, and with saying it's within 10 years also includes that time period. Um, how should mark classify? So so Mitchell, this is now we're at the section where I thought your paper probably could use some greater clarity. Um, so I actually kind of like the phrase to comply with. So you could use phrases like to comply with. I hadn't thought of that phrase, but you could use in accordance with. You could use 408 requires. You could say ASC 480. So there's a whole bunch of different ways. But essentially, it's called an appeal to authority. And that's what Cameron's doing at this moment. She's saying, this isn't my opinion. ASC 480 says, if it's one of these three, um, it needs to be classified as a liability. What she's missing is the alternative. Um, so now, because the question was, how should it be classified? And you're going to reach the conclusion it's equity. If I remember your conclusion on the top line, but all you would have proven with your analysis at this stage is it's not a liability. Obviously, we know that it really is a dilemma. Using Mitchell's phrase, it's a dilemma. It's either liability or equity. But you never said it. So you're trusting the reader is going to understand enough, which coming to Mitchell's point, within equity, there's two types: permanent equity and temporary equity. So I like that it's bullet point. I wonder, is that too cut? I don't know. I could see it going either way. Because it's a little cumbersome because you say you essentially restate what's right above it. So and so it's like, because we say mandatory redeemable, mandatory redeemable, mandatory redeemable like 3 times. Okay. What I would do for sure is the and is in the wrong place. You bolded the wrong phrase. Because it doesn't matter, because you're not even going to get there. The other than outstanding shares or because that's the phrase you really want to draw my attention to. We highlight the and when we want to show they have to satisfy both criteria, but you don't even get to both criteria. Yeah, like I like that was so fast. Like I feel like in this one, you took these 2 bullet points and made them into one. Like you didn't say the preferred stock was an outstanding stock. The preferred stock does not meet the criteria. Like it was just a little more efficient. But I really like how this is reading. I want to highlight the or there because if it satisfies either criteria, it has to be classified. So I need to be systematic, is outstanding shares, and does not body an unconditional obligation. Now, I think that's too short. Or if the financial is non and embodies a conditional obligation. Only if the financial officials must be classified only if embodies an unconditional obligation. Did you flip the order here? And that's what's getting me. The first one is an unconditional obligation. And you listed the outstanding argument first. Like you dealt with the criteria in the reverse order. And that's when I was reading the second one, I was like, well, no, it says conditional. And so that's not as it requires a liquidating event. Deemed. So what I'm adding is, I just can't say it doesn't embody an unconditional obligation. I mean, I've got to give some proof behind that. Because it does talk about how it could be issued for stock in the event of a liquidating event. So we just want to, or we want to mention in passing. And again, a footnote might be a tool you use. No, technically speaking, the client, this could constitute this, or I add one sentence. Preferred stock. Again, I don't know that I would say rows at this stage. I don't think you need to do that. So I'm gonna keep the wrong order for now. And outstanding shares does not. So it does not. First area. Well, it can be issued variable stare. It depends upon a conditional event. So the other criteria. Like I gotta give some explanation. Because it's saying it's outstanding, it's kind of self-evident. There's no proof required, but it does talk about for consistency of formatting. I would just break it out like that, just so it, because all your other ones have been kind of, you haven't just gone immediately right after. I I like to lead with the headline. And it's not. Were you wrong? No. And I keep saying this because I know people are going to watch this saying he just wants to change everything. I want you to imagine if I charged you a dime a word, would you think that it was worth an extra dollar to write those out that way? And that's really the way you got to start viewing time. Is it's costly. Now, I want to make it a little easier on my reader. So I'm going to put some kind of divider. Just because that way it really signals that this is a separate issue because it's easy to get this blending. You did that very efficiently. You might want to add a little bit more. Were issued in a combined transaction, no dispute. So it does not. While the warrants were issued in a combined transaction, do not satisfy. No, I don't think I need. That's just wordy. I'm trying to be clever. They can be exercised. I have one little detail because details make me look like I know what I'm talking about. And so I would put that in. Okay, now I got a problem. If this were a court, and remember your audit work papers or memos you made for clients can become the basis of lawsuits. So if there's a fraud or something, can you tell me the exact paragraph where it states? Or are you paraphrasing? And that's the word states has a very specific meaning. So if you state something, that sounds like a quote. indicates is much broader. Suggest is too weak because it doesn't suggest. It's a lot stronger than suggesting you should do this. Now, I won't ding you on this, but I'm sure there's some English professor or some partner somewhere would care. I don't know where you put the period. Like, do you put a period at the end of each sentence? I have no idea. So I can't ding you on it because I don't know what the right answer is, and I'm guilty of it. Um, so again, I don't know if you're right. I've read this case like 15 times, read so many memos, but what I like about this is it's concise. So I don't know how many words we are, 749. So I've read some that are 3,000 words at this stage. There was one person who sent me a 3,000 word version of this where they try to take every concept from the standards, every concept from the case. And the reality is we've got to distill this down to the shortest usable thing. Did you address the major issues in the case? Yeah. Did you provide sufficient background to understand the case? Yes. Um, would I go back? Some other phrases I might, some tricks I will teach, just emphasizing. So what I did there was whenever I used in this memo, I could say a liquidation or deemed liquidation event. I'm using those terms as being both happening. I'm just saying whenever I refer to liquidating event, I mean liquidating or deemed liquidating event. It avoids me having to say the same phrase because it's not actually a meaningful difference in my memo. I so would I stress if I had that as two separate lines? No. Um, like even these two. Where the reason why I mentioned I'm trying to show you some of these tricks is sometimes you're actually given a rather than a word limit, you're told just give me a 2-page memo. In which case, you need to be able to find ways. Like it's nice to spread things out. You've seen me constantly trying to spread things out to make it easier to read. But when someone says they want to compress it, um, and they don't necessarily care about words. I don't know why you care about pages, but that's something people do. So this would be another example if since I'm only going to be talking about the outstanding shares and I'm not going to be systematically going through these other 2 points anyway, I don't need to highlight it. Now, there would be some on a more complicated issue. You would, let's say it violated multiple criteria. I might include, it failed to satisfy 2 of the 3 criteria. It was both an outstanding share and it did not include an obligation to repurchase shares. The reason why I'm doing that is if I'm wrong on one, I'm still right in my, I've given enough proof that to convince everyone I'm right overall. This is a good memo. Now, it was a good memo before we started. I hope you've seen all what we're just trying to refine. It's not like, I hope you understood what I meant.
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful.
Okay, so I'm going to send this back to you. Katie, and then we will get, you guys have time and patience. I will get to everyone. Okay, so now we're just waiting for Katie's to load. Okay, there it is. Ah, it's over on the other screen. Okay, so now I have to.
Yeah, I'll apologize in advance for all the comments. It's mostly just me like questioning everything I'm doing. So that sidebar is already kind of cluttered.
Comments are phenomenal when you're doing a draft to help to signal your review, whoever's reading it, where are the areas where you're most looking for help. And so it just provides, again, conciseness. Now, turn track changes on. And I'm going to say this every time probably for this whole month. The things I say might come off as harsh because we're editing. Editing is by definition looking for the things that aren't great. It doesn't mean, like I hope you heard at the end of Cameron's presentation, I was like, hey, I actually, even before we started, this was a good memo. All we were doing was polishing the good ideas and the well communicated because we want to move to that next level. And so now, things I don't like on this one. I don't like saying yesterday's presentation for a couple reasons. One, it's referencing a document that's not attached. So if this gets referenced later on in the future, my first question I'm asking is, well, what else was talked about in that presentation? It almost feels like that. Now, if I were writing an email, this would probably be, if I put it just outside of the recommendations. As a follow-up to yesterday's meeting, I wanted to summarize the most important points. That would be fine. But when you include in the recommendations, it's moving into the more familiar away from professionalism. But if you took it out completely in this draft, I don't think you lose anything. Is it? So there's this old television show. It was in Canada. You probably have never heard of it. But a tax man comes to town and they call him the tax man because he represents the man. And the question is, are you a tax man or the tax man? Is it the private company or a private company? And it's a private company because we haven't, it's just a private company. Got to put commas around it because that makes it entered into a bundled exchange with invest company to receive preferred shares You're wrong. So unless I'm wrong. Because this says Rose Company and that the company received preferred stocks and warrants for $100 million. So they gave $100 million and received preferred shares and equity and warrants. But I think the case is to receive because if they receive preferred shares and preferred stock and warrants, aren't those assets? Like if they gave someone $100 million for those, I think that would constitute an asset. So in terms of the details, making sure you have that detail right is going to influence every fact after this. So this detail here, isn't this part of that bundled transaction? Or is there another agreement?
Yeah, I think it's in connection
I think we could probably cut that.
with the bundle.
The reason why I don't need to say were issued, one, it's passive voice, which I'm not entirely sure what that means. But I always get dinged for having passive voice. So I'll ding you because people ding me. But we can just say with the par value. Preferred shareholders, preferred stock shareholder, preferred shareholders receive a payment from available resource. Are you wrong to say from available resources? No, but where else would they come from? The reason why I'll pause on this one because it's another. These are not huge, but they're all kind of significant. So each preferred stock share has an option to convert the shares. It would be the shareholders have the option, not the shares. The shares are inanimate objects. So we can, each preferred stock can by putting the word a there, I'm doing something very significant. I've defined it as a one-to-one relationship without having to waste another sentence. Because you can change one stock of preferred stock for one stock of common stock. Sometimes there's conversion rates, like 2 preferred stocks get you 5 common stocks. In this case, it was saying that you could convert to a common stock. And I do like I don't know again if you're right here. Is it the preferred shareholders have the right to force mandatory conversion? Or is it Rose? Again, I've been reading too many of these, and I think I've seen it 50 half the time one way, half the time the other way. Because it does make a difference when we come to the analysis later on. If the company has the right to force redemption or force conversion, that's a different scenario than, and it becomes mainly relevant for the SEC guidance. Because the company, okay. I like that you combine it into one sentence. I'm just saying you can into one line. You can just make it even faster. What does this mean? The preferred stock is not extinguished.
I think that was just like in the facts.
Okay. No one's mentioned that before. So I was just curious why. So you see how you were writing passive voice. I don't have a great trick other than getting someone who knows what passive voice is and have them constantly, but you want to have everything what's acting. And so I wrote the, I can undo this and then I'll redo what I did. So you made the focus, the expiration will occur. But the thing that's the focus of the sentence is the warrants. So if we say the warrants expire, it's just a little faster and it keeps the focus on the warrant is what's doing something, not the expiration. Because you're making the focus, when will expiration occur? And now we see the discussion we just had with Cameron. You say it must or should. And we probably all should be reading the standard a lot more closely. But we're taking someone else's PowerPoint and we're trying to interpret that, which is kind of a problematic strategy to begin with. It's a good first step. And so we'll let it go. We're not going to stress them. Okay, I am confused by this. It doesn't do that. It defines mandatory as a liability. It doesn't say a mandatory redeemable financial instrument is a liability. Because that's what that says. It define mandatory redeemable financial instruments. They're more than just a liability. They are, what does it mean that it's mandatory redeemable? That the issuer of the instrument has the right to force redemption, making them a lot. Like you see how that because you haven't told me what mandatory redeemable means. And then you even put an exception in here. Like you say, it's just a little confusing on the wording. Like I know you know what you're doing. There's zero doubt in my mind that you know what you're doing, but you're putting all the weight on me. I would be more comfortable if you said this. That under a mandatory, coming back to the a versus the, a manager is a liability unless the requirement rests on the company's liquidation. So I'm not saying that it doesn't, the standard doesn't define a mandatory redeemable financial instrument as a liability, but it does say if you are this, you are a liability. Unless, and I really like, and now because what are the connections to these two paragraphs? Like I don't see the.
I think I was trying to like further define mandatorily redeemable.
Okay.
Like if you have some conditional situation.
Okay. I mean, it is a liability. So it's not further guide. I guess it is further guidance. Okay. What I might do if it's this. This is my first time. So I've taken and fully analyzed that paragraph so I'm not getting confusing. Deferred stock is a collection of items on individual items. We kind of went through. I broke it up because you had 3 paragraphs and you were making it hard to follow your logic. The logic was there. You were 100, you had all the right parts. All I was doing was trying to move them around. So I was dealing with one definition, fully sorting through it, next definition. And if it were me, I might put a sentence at the top, I'm not even gonna think this through. I'm just gonna write gobbledygook, knowing that on edit, I'll clean this up later. There are 3 scenarios. There are 3 potential definitions. Of mandatory and so now I basically gone, I'm just trying to show there are 2, 3, whatever the number is. Financial is mandatory redeemable. So you see what I was doing there? I was switching the focus to say, what does it mean to be mandatory redeemable? And I know there's typos, and I apologize. I'm trying to go. So ASC 470 says if there's the company has a redemption option, it's mandatory redeemable because they have the right to do it unless that requirement only kicks in a termination event. Then you go to under 4A, an instrument is mandatory redeemable if you see how I've now set up a scenario, and now I can go through. It's not meeting these criteria. I've done this. I like where this ended because you had so many good parts. It was just a matter of figuring out how to put them in. Because what we really are talking about is the definition of mandatory redeemable. Does it meet that definition? And so we moved away from talking about the instruments to the definition, became more objective. Contains 2 characteristics. Financial message. It's not outside the scope of the criteria because it simply doesn't satisfy it. The criteria still applies. However, because the first doc was issued as anything, it does not. It cannot satisfy these criteria. Maybe you're right, the scope. Yeah, actually, I think maybe I would settle on scope because we only evaluate these characteristics if it's like we don't apply the revenue standards to this discussion because it's outside the scope of what revenue is to talk about these. However, because the first doc was issued as outstanding shares, it is outside the scope of this. Now I know where I want to change. We never defined a criterion. So you were talking about characteristics and we flipped characteristics to criterion, but it's outside the scope of the standard this standard does not apply would be another way to, however, because it was issued, this standard does not apply will be another way to phrase it. Outside the scope is just another way to say it, probably a more professional way. According to ASC, instruments that are possess a conditional or unconditional obligation, and that the issuer settles by issuing a variable number are reclassified. Now, earlier in the case and things, it just said we don't mention the company's name. There's no confusion over what company we're talking about. The preferred stock is outstanding shares. Preferred stock are outstanding shares. So it is beyond this criterion. Again, I could live with that. Moreover, the stock does not mandate. Moreover, the you list two things here, and it makes me think you went too fast in the sentence here. Because why is there a moreover? If it's beyond the criterion, why do I have to talk moreover? But you're fine. That's, I mean, I wouldn't change it. That would be just tweaking for the sake of tweaking. I would definitely give yourself a little more breathing room for spacing there. All I'm saying is it doesn't apply. And so we don't need to do a detailed amount. Like, again, if you ask me tomorrow to read this, maybe I will have had something different for breakfast and I will phrase it differently because I don't have an answer to you. I'm not trying. Like, no way did Cameron use that phrasing. And I didn't say Cameron was wrong. I didn't say Mitchell was wrong. But I like what you have. It's necessary to evaluate to verify whether this standard applies. Hey, that's a really nice way to say, why are you doing this in discussion? And then you say there's two criterion. I know you can start sentences with the word because. I'm not disputing that. Its power is in its rarity. When it's done too often, it loses power. Also, I would believe, and I'm not trying to insult any partner, older people don't like it. They think it's poorly written. And so the last thing you want them to, even though you're right, you can completely, from an English perspective, I am totally backing you. From people will think you're stupid. I'm warning you that there will be a lot of people who see when you start a sentence with the word because, they're going to think you don't know the rule. But the truth is, you know the rule. They don't know the rule. But since they're the ones who write the paychecks, they make the rule. So Rose issued the preferred stock in a bundle. And so the warrants were not issued, and Rose issued it in a bundled transaction. So this definition, this condition is not satisfied. The reason why I called it condition and not criteria, you called it a condition. I have to have consistency across. It is entered into some other transaction and it is legally detachable and separate. The second condition, good qualification. The second condition, you don't need this. for qualification, it's clear that's what we're talking about. Your young people, when they're writing, are nervous they're going to be criticized for not being clear, but conciseness and clarity are constantly at war. And so in your effort to be as clear as possible, to make sure no one is confused about what you're talking about, you're losing the conciseness that you should have, which might be relevant as we're, and probably a bunch of these are words that I've added. And they don't, I think track changes double counts words. So you're probably fine. And I would not redo anything if I was at 1,012 words. But if I were at 1,700 or 2,500, I would definitely pause. Require that to be extra in conjunction. Okay. What do I gain by this whole sentence? Isn't that just saying, like, so you wrote it here, you rewrote it here, and then you rewrote it a third time where you added numbers. So I'm now thinking we could maybe even do this. Took another great photo in case you wonder what the town was. That would be my answer. Where I go through all three criteria. Actually, I think I'm going to rewrite this a little. First, that was a horrible spelling of condition. It was like I put them together, like some super word. They weren't purchased. The reason why they're not purchased is who is the focus of the transaction, the purchaser or the issuer? Since we're dealing with Invest purchased them. And so, yes, it's true if you sold something, someone purchased it, but we focus on the perspective of the company. They issued these in a bundled transaction. The instruments can be transferred separately, or the warrants can be transferred separately from first. So they are legal, and the warrants can be separately exercisable. So as exercising them does not cause mandatory redemption of the preferred stock. Redemption of the preferred stock does not terminate the warrants. Therefore, the warrants are freestanding instruments. Were you wrong before? No, you were just really cumbersome in how you wrote that. Like you were being so systematic when you, like you said the same sentence 3 times within half a page, which isn't wrong. Like, but think about how little I changed in this paragraph. All I really did was delete, delete, delete. And then I said, first condition, second condition, and then everything else is your words. So you were there. Areas where I can cut down. Well, we're now at 9:51. And again, 1,000 words versus 1,028, that would not be some, I would try and get under it, but I wouldn't take something I like away to arbitrarily get under. Because in the real world, no one's going to look that closely. And so I want to make sure I get to everyone. So I'm going to send this back to you now. Just, you saw what I was doing. And for the video, for the people that are like, I hate the idea of doing this. You basically have had me go through your memos, tell you exactly what I would want to change. Sometimes we're able to go through everything, sometimes we're not. But if you are making a sincere effort to refine better and you're attending these sessions and you're investing, you're going to get perfect. I'm not going to ding people who are willing to put themselves out there and say, I'm willing to help others. Okay.
Thank you, Jason. That was really helpful for going
Oh,
through
not a
that
problem.
in a lot of detail.
I'm going to apologize. I'm not even going to try and butcher your name, Miss Wen. How do I, did I even say your last name right? What would you like me to call you?
Okay. I go by Wendy.
Wendy? Okay.
Yes.
How do you say your name in Chinese?
Xu Wen.
Okay, Wendy, it is.
Yes.
And I'm going to give you a greater defense than I need to. My parents were bad parents. What I mean by that is when I was a baby, and I know you can't see this, the little flap on my tongue actually extends all the way to the bottom, so I'm literally tongue-tied. Now, as a baby, they usually snip it, but my parents didn't. I was like a cute baby, and they're like, we don't want to make my child suffer having a little pain for a week. So my entire life, I've been tongue-tied trying to say names and things that are just a little unusual. I physically am limited, but I'm also scared now because I could probably go to the hospital, but I would not be allowed to talk for weeks. And I have way too many words in my head to not talk for weeks. So I apologize that I am not able to say your name.
That's okay.
Okay. I like summary of oral presentation. There's nothing wrong with that. If I was giving feedback in the real world setting, my feedback would be, will that tell the reader of the email exactly what it is in 6 months or a year when they go back? Because I don't know if you ever had to look for old emails. You want the subject to be informative. So if you could add, oh, I got to duplicate this. Oral of, even just adding the company's name makes it easier when you scan the I'm trying to look for different feedback because this is Preferred stock is only conditional. Now, does the case say that, or is that your conclusion?
So I put the information from the like the solution.
Yeah.
So, okay.
But that's not what I asked. That's the conclusion. So you've given the proof, the analysis, because in the actual, if we were to pull up the case, it doesn't say that it's conditionally redeemable. Well, let me just actually. So if we look up the case, it doesn't actually in the facts. The word conditional doesn't appear in the case. So I'm not disagreeing with your conclusion. Oh, but that's not a fact. That's an interpretation. The fact is the preferred stock does not require redemption other than, so this is a fact. Interpreting that as a conditional redemption event is an analysis. That's a matter of judgment. There is no one who can dispute this statement is true. Some people could dispute. So when you're doing your facts, you're going to read the case only for the information that's objectively true. The preferred stock had a price of this. If we were to say the preferred stock was issued below market value, unless we had a source to back that up, that would say as of this date, the stock market was trading at 2/3 of the stock price. That's a fact. If we say, in our opinion, it was not trading at fair market value, our opinion made it not a fact. This is a fact. It was issued as an outstanding share. So that's going to be a critical fact you're going to pull off later on. Why is this is okay? I'm fine. I'm not going to. This is an interpretation. I think you need to. This again, it's the same thing where you've gone to relied more on the slides than the case for the fact. You're not wrong. You are going to use this information later on, but what was the fact that lets you do it? And this one, you're still close because the case obviously draws heavily on the facts. Okay, now inconsistency is critical, or consistency is critical. Take your pick on how you want to phrase that. Issue 1 is a question. Issue 2 is not a question. Issue 3. So issue 2 is a task. Oh, I forgot to turn on track changes. Do you see what I did there? Because I want each of the issues to be framed the same way. Now, could you have gone the other way? Determine how to classify the preferred stock under A rather than making it a question. So rather than how should, just say determine how to classify, determine the proper classification of preferred stock under, determine the proper classification of the warrant under. So you can make all three determinations. That would also be a valid way to do it. If you had 2 of the 3 questions, I would take the easier path and change one, the one that's an outlier, but that's a consistency that you want to make for the reader. Now, Now, I am certain if we pull up the case, you copied and pasted these. These aren't necessarily the issues. These are the questions that are designed to drive you to the issues. And that's a little unfair. Why don't we just make things normal? Because accountants are jerks. I think you've heard me say this. When cases are written, things are framed, they're not framed in a way that makes it understandable. They're framed in a way to drive you to an answer. But defining the issue is really important. ANSI requires issues classified the following financial institutions. I don't know that this sentence here. Following. Now, following. I think this is weirdly worded. I'm trying to fix it. Issuers. I don't think you need to say following. For instance, then embody. It's like not a complete, like it needs more. Like I'm trying to figure out, requires the issuer to classify as liabilities financial institutions that are mandatory redeemable financial instruments, obligations to repurchase equity shares by transferring assets. Okay, I buy that. So you just need to simplify your writing. It's the financial instruments are one of the following. That are any of the following. The reason why I switched it from are to any of the following, it highlights that it doesn't have to satisfy all three criteria. It's saying, as long as you satisfy one of these three criteria, I'm going to consider this a liability. Okay. The general rule, if it takes more than 2 sentences, you got to do this. No, not that. Don't do that. So the reason why I did that is I'm taking a large section. It pulls it out so the reader knows that this is a quote. This is a long quote. For my general rule, and I'm sure there's probably a better rule, but if it's going to take more than 2 lines of text, I'm going to pull it out. In this case, I might actually just paraphrase it. Like, so option 1 is to do an extended direct quote. The other option is to paraphrase. If you're not comfortable with English or you're not comfortable with your ability to paraphrase, and that's everyone. When you're new in a standard, when you paraphrase, there's a level of risk that am I going to oversimplify? Am I going to minimize something that's really significant? So if you're not comfortable with that, this is a great resolution that's highly credible. Now, faster on the English. Defines mandatory. So I've made. And so I've sped it up, got rid of anything I didn't need to that was repetitive. However, as noted in the facts section, I like that. I like you referencing, you're drawing us back. There is no such requirement in this issue. Well, and that's where you took, remember how I said earlier, you took this thing and you said it was conditional, but that wasn't a fact. Now I would add it here. Okay, so next one, obligations to reprotection. According to an equity shall are classified as liability. Now, preferred stock is a multiple item. It's one of those tricky English things. It's preferred stock, the preferred stock were issued, because the preferred stock is multiple items. It's not a singular item, even though it's not, we don't say preferred stocks. Well, I guess the preferred stocks were issued. You could say add the S, but either way, it's a category. So the preferred stock does not require. So you don't need to say preferred stock twice in a sentence because the object is clear. Okay, so I'm getting, again, we have a very long quote. I'm viewing this as a weak memo at this stage. That would be my general feedback, because I'm not getting a lot of interpretation and paraphrasing. All I'm getting is you went to the standards and cut and paste, and you're not exhibiting judgment. So where's the interpretation of the standard? It's a financial, and so you don't necessarily need to be this literal when you take from the standards. Because this can be summarized. So you're making me work really hard, because now I basically have to read the standard and then you tell me there's a fact and then I'm done. But because right now all I have is, and I mean this with great respect, copying the sentences from the PowerPoint and forming paragraphs from the sentences in the PowerPoint. That doesn't get it done, because ultimately your supervisor wanted you to summarize and add context and add richness. And if you're going to so heavily draw upon that source, where the problem will be like when you don't have that source, how are you going to turn this into a narrative? How are you going to do this? So let's deal with, I'm going to throw something out there. We've only got 5 minutes. But I'm going to say, let's abandon this. Let's just go completely math for a second, because I want to help you. I think this might be interesting. Let's not do this. Let's insert a table. No, that's not. Let me just take all those numbers away, because I don't know why they're there. Let's say you wanted to do this differently. If no one's done this, let's just brainstorm a different way to approach this that might let, if you're not comfortable with the memo writing stage yet. What about if I took these? And then I went and said, I'm gonna turn track changes off because it's bothering me how red this is. That was my fault. I do know. Oh, I do know how to spell facts. Sorry, it took me a while to get this. So one of the options for the memo is to just go a totally different route. Making a table, then saying issue 1, referring to table 1. As you will see, the first 2 criteria are not satisfied. However, the third criteria, none of the 3 criteria are satisfied. And so I basically, if I'm not comfortable writing the full paragraphs, someone reading this will be able to see everything. It looks really clean and professional. And so, especially if I have a, now, would I still want to extend that to a paragraph? The first criteria, as summarized in the first paragraph, section 480 provides 3 scenarios, none of which are satisfied. As the stock is primarily because it is an outstanding share that does not require mandatory redemption, does not have a mandatory redemption event. And so that would be, it allows you to present the information in a slightly different way. And this is why I was hesitant to say, look at the memo in the book, because there's this belief that that's the only way to communicate. But some supervisors love tables. I love summary tables when I've got a complicated problem, because it lets me kind of, okay, I'm going to look at this summary table. Yeah, I'm tracking. Now I want to go into the paragraph for the details. So in the paragraph, some of those more complicated ones, I would have more details. And so if I were doing this again, and I don't know that it's going to let me easily do this right now. I might. So I might have preferred shares. Then I might have a row here that talks about warrant classification. So I put all of them on in one table. There is no one right answer. This, you can do a lot of different ways, and I hope this has been useful. I'm going to send this back to you now. if you want to talk tomorrow, we can keep going. Remember, the deadline is arbitrary. It is meant more as a support mechanism rather than as like you have to get it done by the state, because I know everyone's gonna have slightly different schedules. But if you, today's the 7th, so on Friday, I'm gonna start to grade these. After Friday, if you submit, just let me know. Now I'm gonna stop recording now.